The mountain did not care if a man was lonely. It was too vast, too old, too steeped in silence to recognize such human frailties. Snow still lay in patches among the shaded gullies even as summer reached its height, and the wind that came tearing down from the ridgelines could strip the warmth from a body in a matter of minutes. Yet it was here, in this brutal indifference, that the man had chosen to live. He had no name for himself anymore, not one he spoke aloud. Once long ago, he had been called by a Christian name, and before that, in his younger days, he had been given another title, whispered by those who thought well of him. But names belonged to society, to towns and churches, to the chatter of men and women who needed to place themselves in one another's company. The mountain man had no such company. He had traded his name for silence, and in return, the silence never abandoned him. His cabin crouched low against a slope of pines and granite boulders, its logs dark with age and smoke. He had built it with his own hands nearly a decade before, when his heart was heavier than his pack and he needed a place to vanish. Time had bent its roof a little, and moss clung to the north-facing side, but the cabin still held against winter storms. Inside, the furnishings were spare: a narrow cot, a cast-iron stove, shelves with tin cups, old rifles, and the bones of books whose pages had long since gone brittle. To another man, it might have seemed a prison. To him, it was refuge. His days were simple and patterned. At first light he would rise, stoke the stove, and step out into the thin air with an axe over his shoulder. The work of chopping wood, of hunting small game, of checking his traps, consumed most of his daylight hours. In summer, he fished the creeks and cured strips of trout on racks behind the cabin. In winter, he trudged through snow so deep it could swallow a man, his breath steaming in the frozen hush. He endured all of it without complaint, because it was easier than enduring people. The townsfolk down in the valley spoke of him rarely, and when they did, it was in half-jesting tones. That crazy hermit, they called him, or the wild man up on the ridge. Children whispered that he ate wolves and wore bear hides. Men muttered that he was running from something, maybe the law, maybe his conscience. In truth, all were partly right, but none of them knew his story, and he had no desire to tell it at night. When the fire burned low and the coyotes yipped in the distance, he sometimes let his mind wander back to the time before he came to the mountains. He saw flashes, a woman's face, dark eyes soft with trust, a firelit camp where laughter rose into the starry sky, the sudden cruelty of men with torches and rope. Those memories were why he had left, why he had forsaken the world of men. In the mountains, grief could not be erased, but it could be buried under the daily labor of survival. And yet, even as he told himself he wanted nothing more than the solitude, he could not quite smother the ache of emptiness. He would watch the deer gather in the meadows at dusk, heads bent together as they fed, and something deep in him twisted. He would hear the echo of a hawk's cry along the cliffs and wish briefly for a voice that answered his own. The loneliness was a shadow he lived with as surely as he lived with hunger or cold. It was not that he hated people. Far from it. He remembered the sweetness of human closeness too well to despise it. What he hated was what people could do when their fear and hate were stoked to violence. He had seen how love could be punished, how a gentle bond between two souls could be torn apart by prejudice. That was why he stayed hidden. If he did not belong anywhere, then no one could take anything from him again. The mountain, then, was his confessional and his penance. Every ridge, every storm, every scarred tree was witness to his exile. He was both prisoner and warden of his own sentence, carrying it out day after day with the grim faithfulness of a man who had nothing left to lose. But fate, indifferent as the mountain itself, had other plans. On one storm-lashed evening, as Lightning split the clouds and rain battered the old shingles of his cabin, he would discover that solitude is never eternal. The silence he had built around himself would be broken not by wolves or by weather, but by a woman's presence, bound and brutalized, hanging above his roof like a grim message from the world he thought he had abandoned. For now, though, he was still only the mountain man, nameless, hidden, and alone. The mountain had its seasons of silence and its seasons of fury. Summer afternoons could be deceptively calm, with the forest holding its breath in golden light, but by evening the air often turned against itself. Clouds crawled over the ridges, heavy-bellied and dark, and the thunder began its long conversations. With the valley below, that night was one of those nights, when the mountain reminded a man that it was alive. The hermit had finished his supper, jerked venison and a stale heel of bread, and was whittling by the fire when the first growl of thunder rolled through the timbers of his cabin. He paused, knife still in hand, listening. The sound was far off yet, but it carried weight. He rose, pushed open the door, and leaned into the doorway to scan the sky. Above the jagged line of pines, clouds churned like smoke from a giant's forge. Lightning flickered inside them, not yet breaking loose, just flashing and brooding. The air smelled of ozone and sap, sharp enough to sting the nose. He knew what was coming, a storm big enough to shake the rafters, perhaps even peel back the roof if the wind had its way. He latched the shutters, stacked more wood by the stove, and banked the fire higher. The cabin creaked as the first gusts of wind clawed at it. Rain began, hard and sudden, drumming on the shingles like 1,000 fists. By the time he sat again on his cot, the storm was fully upon him. The lonely man usually welcomed storms. They drowned the world in noise, leaving no room for memories to intrude. He could sit and listen to the wind moan, to the trees crash in the darkness, and feel as if the mountain itself were keeping him company. But that night, the storm brought something different. At first, he thought it was just the wind pulling at the roof beams. A sharp creak, then another, louder, as if a branch were dragging across the shingles. He frowned, rose, and set his knife aside. The sound came again, longer this time, mixed with a thumping that didn't quite belong to wood or weather. He listened harder. It wasn't random. The storm had its rhythm-wind, rain thunder. This sound had another cadence, ragged, desperate, almost like movement. The man's gut tightened. Wolves sometimes clambered onto sheds in search of warmth. Or maybe a tree had fallen, leaving a trunk pressed against his roof. Still, something about it was wrong. He grabbed his lantern, lit it, and lifted his old rifle from the wall. The ladder he kept for repairs was already slick with rain by the time he propped it against the cabin. Lightning split the sky as he climbed, the flash painting the mountainside in blinding silver. In that moment, he saw the forest tossing in the gale, the tall pines bending like reeds, and the clouds boiling low enough to scrape the ridge. He pulled himself onto the roof, boots slipping on wet shingles. The lantern's light bobbed wildly, nearly blown out by the wind. He steadied himself, crouched low, and listened again. Then he saw her. The blonde hair caught the lightning first, plastered wet against a face pale as bone. Her arms were bound. Cruelly behind her, her body hung from a crude harness tied to the chimney stack. Rain poured over her like baptism gone wrong, dripping down her bruised shoulders. And there, seared into the flesh of her back, black and raw, were the words, "Apache lover." The hermit froze, breath caught in his chest. For a heartbeat, the storm seemed to vanish. The thunder muted against the roar of blood in his ears. Memories. Surged faces, fire, cruelty, loss. He nearly dropped the lantern. Another crash of thunder pulled him back. She was alive barely. Her head jerked weakly, lips forming words he couldn't hear over the storm. The shingles shifted under his knees as he crawled toward her, lantern swinging in one hand, the other reaching for his hunting knife. The rope that bound her was soaked and fraying, but tight. He saw welts where the fibers had cut into her skin. He set the lantern down, flicked the knife open, and began sawing at the knots. That was when the shots rang out. The first cracked like the storm itself, echoing down from the tree line beyond his cabin. A bullet sparked off the stone chimney, inches from his head. The second followed close, sending shards of slate spraying across the roof. Someone out there wanted her left hanging. Someone out there had been waiting, the hermit's jaw clenched. With a savage pull, he cut the last of the rope, catching her limp body before it slid off the roof. Her weight nearly carried them both down the slope, but he managed to haul her against his chest. Lantern light flickered across her face, lips. Blue, eyes fluttering but alive. The mountain man pressed low, shielding her with his body as another shot cracked through the storm. Whoever they were, they had marked her as a warning. And now, by cutting her free, he had made himself part of her story. The storm howled louder, the rain driving needles into his skin. He cradled the woman tighter and thought, not for the first time, that the mountain never let a man stay hidden forever. The woman's weight was awkward, deadened by exhaustion and pain. The hermit carried her down the ladder one arm at a time, bracing his boots on each rung as rifle shots still cracked from the tree line. Lightning painted the forest white for an instant, and he thought he saw movement shadows shifting between the pines, but the storm swallowed them again. Whoever they were, they would not linger long in weather like this. He pushed the cabin door open with his shoulder and staggered inside, kicking it shut behind him. The fire he had banked earlier burned bright, casting the room in jittering orange light. For a moment, the man just stood there, breathing hard, rainwater dripping from his beard, his arms cradling the woman as if she were some fragile creature that might shatter. He laid her gently on his cot. She was soaked to the skin, her dress torn in places where rope and rough hands had dragged her. Her face, beneath the plastered tangles of hair, was swollen along one cheekbone, a bruise already blooming purple. But it was her back that stopped him cold. He had seen wounds before, bullet holes, knife cuts, even burns from campfires gone wrong, but nothing like this. The words had been branded deep, the flesh seared until it blistered. Apache lover. The letters were ugly, jagged, carved into her as if her tormentors wanted the mark to scream even after her voice failed. For a long moment, the hermit stood above her, fists clenched at his sides. The fire popped, and he flinched. Memories surged, like ghosts crowding the small room. He had seen a woman marked once before differently, but with the same cruelty, the same message of hatred. That woman had been his, and she had not survived. His throat tightened, his eyes burning. For years he had buried the image, pushed it down beneath silence and solitude, but now it came roaring back with every ragged breath the stranger took. She was not the same, but she was enough. Enough to unravel the walls he had built around himself. The woman stirred, moaning low, her lips forming broken syllables. He knelt beside her, setting his rifle within reach. "You're safe," he said, though the words tasted strange on his tongue rusted from disuse. "Safe for now." Her eyes fluttered open. They were pale blue, clouded with shock but still holding some spark of life. She tried to speak, but the sound came out as a rasp. "Water," he muttered, reaching for the tin cup by the stove. He filled it from the kettle, cooled it with a splash from his canteen, and held it to her lips. She drank greedily, coughing between swallows, then sagged back onto the cot, breathing shallow but steadier. He tore strips from an old linen shirt and began tending the wounds as best he could. The burn on her back was beyond his skill, raw, angry, and oozing, but he cleaned what he could with boiled water and a scrap of cloth. She winced and bit down on a cry, her teeth clenching, eyes wide with pain. He admired her silence. Many would have screamed. When he had done what little he could, he sat back, watching her. She was no longer just a stranger. She was a message. Someone had wanted her to die slowly, marked and humiliated. Someone had fired those shots to keep her from being saved. That meant danger, not just for her, but for him now too. She stirred. Again, her voice hoarse. They left me there. Who? He asked, though he already knew the shape of the answer. Her eyes filled with tears, mixing with the rain still clinging to her lashes. Men from town. They said I shamed them. Her voice broke, but she forced herself onward. Because of him. Because I loved him. The hermit's chest tightened. He didn't ask who him was. He didn't need to. The branded words said enough. For a long time, the only sounds were the crackle of the fire and the storm's fury pounding at the shutters. The hermit sat motionless, his shadow looming against the wall. He could feel the weight of choice pressing on him. He had lived alone precisely to avoid this moment, to keep other people's pain, other people's vengeance far from his door. But here it was, sprawled across his cot, bleeding and broken, branded with the same hatred that had once destroyed his own world. The woman's hand moved weakly, groping until it found his. Her grip was feeble, trembling, but in it was something stronger than fear. Something that asked without words, "Will you let them finish what they started?" He closed his eyes, jaw tight. The past clawed at him, demanding reckoning. He had run from it long enough. When he opened his eyes again, his decision was made. He squeezed her hand gently and said the words he had not spoken in years, words that bound him to the living once more. "They won't touch you again." Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the cabin, the true reckoning had already begun. The fire snapped in the stove, throwing restless shadows across the log walls. Outside, the storm still howled, but beneath its voice the hermit could hear something else, the faint echo of movement, a boot scuff in the mud, the rattle of a horse's harness. Men were out there circling. He rose from the cot, careful not to disturb the woman. She had drifted into a shallow sleep, breath rasping unevenly, her back still raw beneath the linen bandages he had wrapped around it. She looked fragile now, pale as the ash in the stove. But the words burned into her flesh were louder than her weakness. Apache lover. That brand wasn't just meant to scar her. It was meant to call her an enemy of her own people. And enemies, in the minds of men like the ones outside, did not deserve mercy. The hermit crossed to the corner and lifted his rifle. The old weapon was well kept despite its years, the wood polished by countless hands, the steel cleaned after every hunt. It had not spoken to another man in a long while. Tonight, it might have to. He blew out the lantern and peered through the narrow slit between the shutters. Lightning flared, and for a moment the world outside lit up like midday. He saw them. Then shapes among the trees, moving low and careful. 3 at least, maybe more. One was crouched with a rifle braced across his knee. Another held a torch, the flame struggling in the rain. The hermit pulled back from the window. They were not simply watching. They were waiting. Waiting to see if the mountain man had done what they expected, cut the girl down and taken her in. The rope on the roof was empty, and that was proof enough. He crouched beside the cot. The woman stirred, opening her eyes to the darkness. "They're still there?" She whispered. "Yes," he answered, voice low and steady. Her hand trembled as she clutched the blanket to her chin. "That won't stop." He knew she was right. Men like that rarely left a job half done. The hermit had seen it before seen. How vengeance could make a man relentless. This wasn't just punishment. This was possession. They meant to break her spirit, make her death a warning to any who dared cross their invisible lines. A plan began to form in his mind, rough and dangerous. The storm was both curse and blessing. It muffled sound, blinded aim, and turned the ground to treacherous muck. If he moved quick, he might use it. But first, he had to move her. "I'll get you out," he said. Her eyes widened, fear flickering in them. "You'll be killed." "Maybe," he admitted. "But staying here is worse." She said nothing, only tightened her grip on the blanket, as though she could fold herself small enough to disappear. The hermit moved swiftly. He pulled his old oilskin cloak from its peg and wrapped her in it, hood drawn low to cover her hair. Then he lifted her into his arms again. She gasped softly at the pain but did not protest. He slung his rifle across his back, the strap digging into his shoulder, and eased the door open. Rain sheeted down, immediately soaking his beard and hair. He stepped into the night, boots sinking into the mud. The storm swallowed the sound of the door closing behind him. He didn't head toward the trail that led down into the valley. That path was too obvious, too likely to be watched. Instead, he turned uphill toward the rocks where the mountain sloped steeply into a ravine. His legs burned under the woman's weight, but he moved with the practiced surety of a man who had walked these woods blind many nights before. Behind him, a shout went up. They had seen him. A gunshot cracked, and bark splintered from a pine just above his head. The woman whimpered against his chest. He crouched low, hard hammering, and darted from trunk to trunk, using the trees as cover. The men were shouting now, their voices carried thin by the storm. One voice in particular rang above the others, sharp and hateful. "Bring her back. She dies here, or you both do." The hermit gritted his teeth. He didn't recognize the voice, but he knew the type. He had heard that same tone years ago in another place when another mob decided love was a crime. The rage that rose inside him was hot and steady, burning away the cold of the rain. Another shot came, closer this time. He dropped behind a boulder, pressing the woman down into the wet leaves. She was shivering, not just from the cold, but from fear. "Stay still," he whispered. His hand brushed her cheek, just for a moment. Her eyes met his, desperate, trusting. He slung the rifle into his hands, braced the stock against his shoulder, and waited. Lightning flashed, and in that instant he saw the torchlight weaving through the trees. A shape moved against it, one of the men stepping into the open. The hermit's fingers squeezed the trigger. The rifle cracked like thunder, lost in the storm, and the shadow dropped. There was no going back now. The storm faded slowly through the night, its rage broke into a sullen drizzle by dawn. Mist clung to the trees, drifting between the trunks like ghosts reluctant to leave. The hermit had found a shallow cave halfway up the ravine, hidden behind a screen of brush. He laid the woman down there, away from the open paths, his own back to the entrance as if his body were a barricade. The fire he built was small, just a whisper of flame, fed by dried chips shaved from the inside of pine logs. It was enough to warm her, to drive the chill of the storm from her bones. The woman lay swaddled in his cloak, her eyes half closed, her breath rattling softly. For a while, neither of them spoke. He listened to the drip of rain on stone, to the distant rumble of a creek swollen with runoff. His mind replayed the night again and again. The roof, the gunfire, the man he had dropped with one shot. He wondered if the others still searched, or if they had already carried their wounded back to town. At last she stirred, shifting under the cloak, her voice faint but clear. "You saved me." He turned toward her, his expression unreadable. "I did what had to be done." She managed the smallest ghost of a smile. Most wouldn't. The hermit looked into the fire, jaw tightening. Most wouldn't. He knew that too well. Years ago, when the mob came for the woman he loved most, had stood aside, some had joined in. A few had looked away, pretending not to hear her cries. The memory pressed on him like a stone in his chest, but he swallowed it down. This was not the time for his story. Instead, he said quietly, "Tell me yours." The woman's eyes glistened in the firelight. She drew a shaky breath as though the words themselves were heavier than her wounds. "My name is Sarah Whitfield," she began. "My father owns the Whitfield Ranch south of the valley. He's a hard man. Proud of his land, proud of his bloodline, proud of being white." Her voice cracked and she looked away as if ashamed of saying the truth aloud. The hermit only nodded, urging her on. "I met him 3 years ago," she continued softly. "His name was Nanton, Apache. He worked sometimes on the ranches, breaking horses no one else could ride. He wasn't like anyone I'd ever known. Gentle with me, patient, and strong in ways my father never understood. I loved him." She paused, tears sliding down her cheeks. The hermit said nothing, his silence heavy but not unkind. "When my family found out, they warned me. They said it was a disgrace, an abomination, that he'd only use me, that he was less than human." Her voice hardened, anger piercing through the sorrow. "But they were wrong. He was more of a man than any of them." She clutched the blanket tighter as if bracing herself. "We planned to marry in secret. Nanton even went to the pastor in town, but the man refused. He said it was against God's will. When my father heard, he gathered others men from town, men with old grudges against the Apache. They came for us." The hermit's fists clenched unconsciously. He already knew where her story would end. "They beat him," Sarah whispered, "dragged him into the dirt like he was nothing. I tried to stop them, but they held me down. They said I had chosen shame, that I wasn't fit to call myself white anymore. Then," she shuddered, her breath breaking, "then they branded me." Burned the words into my back while he watched. Her tears came harder now, her voice trembling. "He tried to fight, but they shot him, left him bleeding. I don't even know if he's alive. They tied me on that roof so everyone could see, so the whole valley would know what happens to a woman who loves the wrong man." The hermit bowed his head. For a moment, the fire's crackle was the only sound. He wanted to speak, wanted to tell her how he understood, how he too had held someone as the world's hatred closed in. But the words stuck in his throat. Finally, he said, "They wanted to erase him through you." Sarah met his eyes, surprised at the raw edge in his voice. He wasn't just a stranger with a rifle in a cabin. He was someone who knew. She nodded slowly. "Yes, they think fear can bury love." Her hand, trembling, reached for his. "But it doesn't, not really." The hermit let her touch linger, though it set something burning in his chest. He knew then what her presence meant. The mountain had carried his grief for years, but now it had delivered him a choice. Keep hiding while men like that ruled the world, or stand with this broken woman who carried the same scars as him. The dawn mist thickened outside the cave. Somewhere down in the valley, men were surely waiting, rifles ready, their hatred unsatisfied. The hermit tightened his grip on Sarah's hand and whispered, "They'll come again. And this time, we'll be ready." The town of Clearwater was small, but its fury could swell to fill every street and shadowed porch. By the time the storm broke, the men who had strung Sarah Whitfield on the hermit's roof had already carried their wounded companion back into town. Word spread faster than the rainwater spilling through the gullies. The hermit had taken her in, and one of ours lies dead in the mud because of him. By sunrise, the saloon was thick with smoke and muttered oaths. Boots scraped the warped floorboards. Fists slammed on tables sticky with whiskey. Men who had been too cowardly to do more than watch the branding now puffed themselves up with second-hand rage. Their voices blended into a chorus of spite, feeding each other until the air itself vibrated with it. He shot a man. Barked one ranch hand, face red with drink. He sheltered her. Another spat. Same as if he branded himself with the same filth. Someone slammed a bottle so hard the neck shattered. That old hermit's been trouble for years. Ain't. No reason a man lives alone up in the hills unless he's hiding sins. Now we know what kind. At the far end of the bar, a heavy-set man in a black duster sat with arms folded, listening. His name was Clayton Voss, foreman of Whitfield Ranch. He'd been the loudest voice the night Sarah was branded, the one who'd held the iron until the flesh smoked. His eyes were hard, pale, like chipped stone. When the shouting reached a fever pitch, Voss rose. His presence alone was enough to silence most of the room. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. That hermit, he said, voice like gravel dragged across steel, took what was meant as a lesson to every girl in this valley. He made it an insult. One of ours is dead, and the Apache lover still breathes because of him. Now I don't know about you, but I won't have a man spitting in our faces and walking away clean. The crowd grumbled agreement. Voss leaned forward. On the bar, his shadow long in the smoky lamplight. We'll finish it. Tonight, before the trail gets cold. We ride with rifles, with dogs. Burn his shack to the ground. And when we find him, he paused, letting the silence grow sharp. We do what should have been done in the first place. A murmur of approval rolled through the room. Some slapped the bar. Others muttered prayers under their breath, as though vengeance were righteous duty. Only one man, a younger ranch hand with a nervous tremor in his voice, spoke up. Clayton, what if she dies up there anyway? You know she's hurt bad. Maybe we've done enough. Voss's gaze turned on him like a blade. Done enough, he repeated, low and dangerous. You think letting her breathe, letting her crawl back into her father's house with her shame is enough? That brand was for every soul in this valley to see. If she lives, it means we were weak. You want folks whispering that Clearwater's men can't finish what they start? The boy shrank under his stare. No one else dared speak. Voss nodded, satisfied, and tossed a coin on the bar. Drink up, saddle at sundown. By midnight, we'll have her body swinging from a tree and that hermit's scalp nailed to the saloon door. The men cheered, savage and hollow. By the time dusk fell, the mob was ready. 20 riders, rifles slung, lanterns lit despite the mist that still clung to the valley floor. Dogs bayed at the end of leashes, eager for the hunt. Voss rode at the front, hat pulled low, his duster flaring in the wind like a shadow made flesh. Behind him, the men muttered threats and promises, trying to outdo each other in cruelty. Some laughed, mean and nervous. Others stayed grim, faces set like stone. But all of them rode together, bound by the same hunger, to erase shame with violence, to drown fear with blood. As they left town, Sarah's father stood on the porch of the ranch house, watching. He said nothing. His face was carved into lines of pride and silence. Whether he approved of the mob or simply lacked the strength to stop them, no one could tell. But his silence was its own kind of consent. The riders vanished into the hills, torches bobbing like angry stars in the dark. The valley fell quiet again, as though holding its breath. High above, in the cave hidden by brush and stone, the hermit felt the change in the air. He had lived long enough with the mountain to know when something stirred against him. He looked out into the mist and said nothing, but his hand tightened around the stock of his rifle. Sarah lay behind him, fevered but awake, her eyes searching. His face. She did not need to ask what he had sensed. She saw it in the hard set of his jaw. They're coming, aren't they? She whispered. The hermit nodded once, slow and grim. They're coming. The cave was still, except for the faint hiss of rain dripping from the rocks outside. The hermit sat with his rifle across his knees, his eyes fixed on the mist that clung to the ravine. He could feel them out there, somewhere in the folds of the forest, the mob, tightening their noose dot behind him. Sarah shifted restlessly on the bed of pine boughs he'd laid for her. Fever had set in. Her skin glistened with sweat despite the chill, her lips pale. The burn across her back wept under the linen, the wound angry and hot. He had boiled water, cleaned it again, but he was no doctor. He knew if she did not find true care soon, infection would claim her faster than any bullet. He was trapped between two roads, both leading into fire. If he tried to move her down into the valley, the mob would catch them. She could barely stand, let alone outrun mounted men and dogs. If he stayed here, they'd find him eventually. And when they did, it would be death for both of them. He had lived 10 years avoiding choices like this. 10 years keeping his world simple. Hunt, trap, fish, survive. He thought he had buried the man who once fought for something more, the man who had bled for love. But Sarah's eyes fevered yet unbroken dragged that buried self back into the light. She stirred, whispering. His name, not his true name, she did not know it. But the sound of her voice, weak though it was, anchored him. He turned, kneeling beside her. "You need rest," he said, her gaze fixed on him, searching. "They won't stop," she murmured. He nodded. There was no comfort in lies. "No, they won't." Her hand trembled as she reached for him, clutching his sleeve. "Then don't run, please. Don't let them. Don't let them do to you what they did to him." The words struck like a hammer. Don't let them do to you what they did to him. He saw Nathan's shadow in her words, the Apache horsebreaker she had loved. He had never met the man, yet he felt a kinship with him. They had both loved across forbidden lines. Both had seen. That love hunted. The hermit's beloved had been taken by the same kind of cruelty years before, and he had run from it, fled into the mountains to hide among pines and silence. That was his shame. He had not fought. He had not stood. He had survived, yes, but survival was not life. It was only waiting for death. He bowed his head, gripping her hand gently. The firelight flickered across the hollow of his face, showing lines carved by regret. "I came here to disappear," he admitted. His voice sounded foreign, hoarse with truths left unsaid for years. "I thought if I stayed in these hills, the world would forget me, but it hasn't. It never does. Hatred doesn't die just because a man turns his back on it." Sarah's eyes shone with fever and something more, a quiet strength. "Then face it." For a long moment, silence hung between them, filled only by the drip of rain and the crackle of the tiny fire. The hermit wrestled with the weight of her words. He could take her deeper into the mountains, keep hiding until the fever took her, and then bury her beside his cabin under the pines. No mob would find her there. She would die quietly, and he would live quietly again. But the thought twisted in his gut. Another grave, another love destroyed, another coward silence. He looked at her, at the brand burned into her back, at the fire still alive in her eyes despite everything, and he knew. Running was no longer an option. The hermit rose slowly, setting his rifle against the cave wall. He crossed to the packs he had kept for years, supplies stashed in case of flight. From one, he pulled oil, rags, a whetstone, and an old revolver wrapped in oiled cloth. His hands moved with the precision of long practice as he stripped and cleaned each weapon. The smell of gun oil filled the cave, sharp and metallic. Sarah watched, her breath uneven, but her lips curved into the faintest smile. "You've done this before," she whispered. "Yes," he said simply. "And I'll do it again." He slid the revolver into its holster, checked the rifle's chamber, and sat back down beside her. His jaw was set, his eyes clear in the flickering firelight. "You should know," he said, "once I start this, there's no turning back. If they want you, they'll have to kill me, and if they come to kill me, I'll kill them first." Sarah's fingers found his, weak but insistent. "Then I'm not afraid." The hermit closed his eyes for a moment, feeling her hand in his frail, burning with fever, yet braver than his own had ever been. For the first time in years, he felt something stir in him that wasn't bitterness or grief. It was resolve. Outside, somewhere in the mist, a dog barked. The mob was close. The hermit opened his eyes, and in them burned a fire the mountain hadn't seen in a decade. "They'll learn," he said softly, "what it means to leave a man no choice." The hermit sat by the cave entrance long after. Sarah drifted into a fevered sleep. His rifle rested across his lap, the barrel dark in the moonlight that filtered faintly through the mist. He did not move, hardly even breathed, as if stillness itself might keep the mob at bay. But his mind was anything but still. The storm outside had passed, but another storm churned inside him. Every creak of a branch, every splash of rainwater, dripping from the cliffs above, drew him back into memory. He had spent 10 years trying to bury it, but ghosts never stayed buried. He saw her face first, the woman who had once been his world. Her name had been Ayanna, though he had not spoken it aloud in years. She had been Apache too, just like Sarah's Nanton. He remembered the first time he saw her at a trading post, the way she had laughed softly at his clumsy attempts to bargain. In her tongue, her eyes had been dark and steady, the kind that could hold a man's gaze until all his doubts scattered like birds. For months he had returned, at first with excuses of trade, later with none at all. She had taught him words, songs, even the rhythm of her people's dances, laughing when he stumbled, encouraging when he tried again. Against every warning, against the mutterings of settlers and the suspicious stares of her kin, they had chosen each other. Those were the happiest days of his life and the most dangerous. He remembered the night the mob came, torches snaking across the dark hills like a river of fire. He had heard them before he saw them, the thunder of hooves, the shouts twisted with anger. By the time he ran to Ayanna's lodge, they were already upon her. He could still hear her screams, still see the way they dragged her into the dirt, still smell the stench of burning wood as they set fire to the lodge. He had fought, God help him. He had fought with fists, with a hunting knife, with sheer desperation, but there had been too many. They beat him until his blood painted the ground, and when he came to, she was gone. Later, he found her body at the edge of the clearing, marked, brutalized, left like a warning to anyone who dared follow the same path. That night, something in him had died. He buried her under a pine tree, far from the place of her people, because he could not carry her home. Then he walked into the mountains and never came back down. His name, his past, his place among men, he let it all rot in the valley below. He became no one, because no one could lose again. And yet, here was Sarah, branded with the same hatred, cast out for the same love. Her story was his story retold, her scars echoing the scars he carried inside. Fate had dragged him from silence, forcing him to look into a mirror of his own past. The hermit pressed his palms against his eyes, trembling with the memory. For years he had convinced himself he was strong for surviving. Now he saw it for what it was, cowardice. He had let them win. He had let them drive him into the wilderness while they kept burning, kept branding, kept killing. No more, he whispered into the darkness. His voice shook, but it was steady with resolve. Not again. Behind him, Sarah stirred in her sleep, murmuring words he could not catch. He glanced at her, seeing not just a broken woman but a symbol proof that the cruelty he had fled still lived in the valley below. Saving her would not undo the past. Nothing could. But it could mean something now. It could mean Ayanna's. Death was not just another forgotten crime. He looked at his rifle, at the revolver cleaned and loaded by his side. The weight of them was both terrible and familiar. He had once thought never to raise them against another man again. Now he knew he would. Not because he craved blood, but because some debts demanded payment. The dogs barked again, closer this time. Voices echoed faintly through the trees, carried by the night air. The mob was hunting, their firelight weaving between the trunks below. The hermit closed his eyes, and in the darkness he saw Ayanna's face, not as she had died, but as she had lived, smiling with the dawn at the trading post. Her hand slipping into his dot when he opened his eyes again, they were clear. The ghosts had returned, but not to haunt him. They had come to guide his hand. He checked the rifle one last time, then laid a hand gently on Sarah's shoulder. She stirred. Blinking awake, confusion clouded by fever. "Rest," he told her. "When the time comes, I'll be ready." And for the first time in a decade, he truly was. The first torchlight appeared like a star among the trees. Then another. Then 20, bobbing and weaving through the mist as the mob climbed the slope. The night air filled with the baying of hounds and the clatter of hooves against stone. The hermit crouched at the mouth of the cave, rifle pressed to his shoulder, his breath slow and steady. He had become part of the mountain's silent, patient, waiting dot inside. Sarah lay against the pine boughs, weak but awake. Her eyes followed the glow outside, her lips whispering prayers through fever. She did not call out to him. She did not beg him to run. Her silence was trust, and it weighed on him heavier than the rifle in his hands. The mob fanned out below the cliff, torches painting the rocks in angry orange. Clayton Voss rode at the front, his black duster flaring behind him, pale eyes fixed on the dark slope. He raised his arm and the riders halted. "Dogs," Voss commanded. The hounds surged forward, noses pressed to the ground, their handlers straining at the leashes. They barked wildly at the base of the cliff, claws scrabbling at the stone. The mob muttered eagerly, shifting rifles on their shoulders. The hermit watched, calculating. He had one chance to break their courage before they swarmed. He drew a bead on the lead torchbearer, a ranch hand he remembered from the saloon, a man who had shouted loudest about branding. The hermit exhaled and squeezed the trigger. The crack echoed across the valley. The torchbearer's head snapped back, and the man dropped like a sack, fire spilling from his hand into the brush. Flames licked at the dry grass. The mob howled in shock. Scrambling, another shot rang out before they could gather themselves. A second man folded, clutching his chest. Panic rippled through the ranks. Some dropped their torches, others scrambled for cover behind rocks. The dogs yelped, straining against handlers too stunned to control them. Voss sat unmoving, his horse shifting beneath him. He raised his voice above the chaos. "Steady, it's one man. One old man. We'll gut him out of his hole." The hermit fired again, striking one of the hounds. The beast dropped mid-leap, rolling in the dirt. Rage exploded from the mob. They surged forward, screaming curses, rifles spitting fire into the dark. Bullets clanged against stone, sparking off the cliff face. The cave shuddered with the echo. The hermit ducked back, pulling Sarah closer to the shadows. Chips of rock sprayed around them, stinging his cheek. He reloaded with quick, practiced motions, fingers sure despite the thunder of gunfire. When the shooting slowed, he stepped forward again, took aim, and picked off another man. This time he didn't wait for silence. He fired again and again, his rifle kicking against his shoulder, every shot deliberate, every shot finding its mark. The mob faltered. Men screamed, dropped rifles, clutched wounds. The brush fire from the fallen torch spread, adding smoke to the mist, choking the air. The mountain itself seemed to fight against them. Still Voss held his ground. His pale eyes locked on the cave, his voice cutting through the panic. "You think this makes you a hero, hermit? You're nothing but a coward hiding in rocks. You'll starve in there, and we'll be waiting when you crawl out." The hermit lowered his rifle, staring down at Voss. For a moment, silence hung between them. Two men, mirror images of opposite worlds, one driven by hate, the other by ghosts. Then the hermit raised his voice, rough from years of disuse, but steady. "You branded a woman for love. You murdered a man for her choice, and you think I'll hide? No. Tonight it ends." His words rolled through the valley like thunder. Some of the mob shifted uneasily, eyes darting to Voss. Doubt was a poison, and the hermit had poured it into their hearts. Before Voss could answer, the hermit fired again, this time not at a man, but at the saddle girth beneath Voss's horse. Leather snapped. The horse reared, and Voss tumbled into the dirt. Torches scattered as men scrambled to pull him up. For the first time, fear flickered across his pale eyes. The hermit's voice cut down from the cliff. "This mountain is mine. You want me, you'll bleed for every step." The mob hesitated, wavering between rage and terror. Some turned there, horses retreating into the mist. Others clung to their torches, eyes wide, waiting for Voss to rise. And in that moment, the balance shifted. The hermit felt it. He had drawn blood, broken their certainty. The reckoning had begun, and the night was far from over. The mob scattered like frightened cattle, half blind in the smoke from burning brush. Some fled down the slope, cursing the night. Others stayed, firing wild shots into the cliff face, too afraid to advance and too ashamed to retreat. And at the center of it all, Clayton Voss pulled himself to his feet, dirt streaked across his face, his pale eyes burning hotter than the torches around him. "Kill him!" Voss roared, his voice carrying over the chaos. "Drag him out by his beard. The coward dies tonight." The hermit pressed his back to the stone wall of the cave, rifle barrel warm in his hands. Sarah coughed weakly behind him, the fever gnawing at her strength. He looked once at her pale face, at the brand that marked her, and knew there was no choice left. He could not wait for the mob to starve him out. This fight would end tonight, one way or another. He stepped out into the open air, onto the narrow ledge that overlooked the slope. Smoke curled around him. Firelight painted the mist red. He looked down upon the mob like a figure risen from the grave. Clayton Voss. The hermit bellowed. His voice was ragged but thunderous, rolling across the valley like the call of a judge. "You want me? Here I stand." All eyes turned upward. Guns rose, torches wavered. Some men shouted warnings, others curses. Voss froze, his pale eyes narrowing as recognition flickered there. "You!" Voss hissed. "I know you." The hermit's lips curled, not in a smile but in something sharper. "You should. You and your kind killed her, burned her, left me with nothing but ghosts. Now you'll answer for it." The memory of Ayanna, the woman he had loved and lost, hung heavy between them, though Voss might not remember her name, only the crime. But the hermit remembered every detail. And tonight, vengeance had come due. Voss raised his revolver and fired. The bullet screamed past the hermit's ear, sparking off stone. The hermit dropped to one knee, leveled his rifle, and fired back. The shot punched through the hat of a man beside Voss, dropping him flat. Chaos erupted. Torches flew. Gunfire cracked. Horses reared. The slope turned into a battlefield of smoke and flame. The hermit fired until his rifle clicked empty. Then he drew the revolver, its grip worn smooth by years of disuse. He descended the rocky path, each step deliberate, like a man walking into judgment. Bullets whined past him, some striking rock, others grazing his coat. Still he came on, figure of grim inevitability. Vos shouted for his men to hold, but they were faltering. One after another they fell back, unwilling to be the next corpse in the dirt. The hermit's fury was not wild but precise, every shot purposeful, every step forward unstoppable. At last, only Voss remained, standing his ground amid the smoke. He leveled his revolver with both hands, teeth bared in rage. The hermit raised his own. For a moment, the world shrank to two men, mirrors of hate and loss. Bound by the same fire that had burned so many lives, they fired at the same time. Hermit staggered, a burning pain ripping through his shoulder. His revolver slipped, but he caught it again, raising it with trembling strength. Across the clearing, Voss screamed, clutching his gut, falling to his knees. His revolver dropped into the dirt, useless. The hermit approached slowly, blood seeping down his arm, revolver trained steady. Voss gasped, his pale eyes wide, his hands slick with red. "You think this makes you righteous?" Voss spat, coughing. "You think she's avenged? You'll die up here like a dog, same as her." The hermit looked down at him, face carved. "In stone. No," he said quietly. "I'll die a man who finally stopped running." The shot rang out, final and merciless. Voss fell backward, eyes open, staring into nothing. Silence descended, broken only by the crackle of flames and the distant retreat of the last surviving riders. The mob had broken. Their leader lay dead in the dirt. The reckoning was complete. The hermit lowered his revolver, breath ragged. His knees threatened to give, but he forced himself back up the path, back to the cave. Sarah waited, her eyes wide with fear and hope. When he entered, she reached for him. "Is it over?" He sank to his knees beside her, the weight of blood and ghosts pressing down on him. He brushed a hand gently across her hair. "It's over," he whispered. Outside, the fire smoldered. The valley would remember this night. Some would call him a murderer, others a madman. But in the ashes there was a different truth. One man, broken by loss, had finally stood against the tide. He leaned back against the cave wall, blood seeping, exhaustion flooding through him. Yet he felt no fear. For the first time in a decade, his heart was at peace. Sarah's hand rested in his, frail but warm. The mountain was quiet again, and as dawn began to break over the ridge, the hermit closed his eyes, ready to let the ghosts rest at last.